Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. This is part 5 of the history of solid-state drives on our channel 2016 to 2022. If you are watching this while it is public, thank you, welcome. I appreciate your support and I appreciate you watching all of these videos. If you are watching this early access, thank you very much for your direct financial support. It is greatly appreciated. It helps keep us on the air when these interesting history videos maybe don't get as many views as some other content might. It is greatly appreciated. If by chance you are watching this when it's public, there is one more part coming, part 6, which will be early access for several weeks for YouTube members, linked down in the video description below, and there's a join button next to the subscribe button. For $2 per month or $20 for the entire year, you can directly support the channel, get early access to videos. In fact, members got access to all 6 parts early up front, which was quite a bit of early access. If you are a gold member, there is an absolute ton of member exclusive videos that are not available to the public. At the time of filming, there's about 120 or 125 member-only videos, so join at the gold level if you'd like to see those, or join over on Floatplane. They're available there as well. Without further ado, we have a lot to cover today. Please grab a drink, grab a snack, and let's get into this. Today's video is brought to you by eWin Racing, the best source for gaming chairs and desks for those long gaming sessions. We have a playlist of our eWin chair and desk videos linked in the video description below. Save 30% off of everything using the discount code TechDeals. More details at the end of the video. The XPG S70 is an interesting drive. There has been a firmware update released which dramatically alters its performance. If you have one of these drives, please make sure your firmware is updated. Unfortunately, ADATA's toolbox is wanting, but you can do it. This drive was just average with the launch firmware, but it has been retested and it is a dramatic and noticeable improvement with the updated firmware. This is a PlayStation 5 certified drive. I looked up the numbers. When I was looking at the S70, the S50 Lite, I was confusing the S70 Blade with the S50 Lite. This comes with a big chunky heatsink installed. There are 2 versions of this drive. There is this one that has, well, I wish I had the drive to show you, but they're all installed in something. This comes with a big chunky heatsink, which will not fit in a PlayStation 5 and will not fit under covers on motherboards. The S70 Blade comes with a teeny tiny thin heatsink, which does nothing. And all the reviews say this version does not thermal throttle, and the Blade version with the tiny useless heatsink does. Nothing you can do about that in the PlayStation 5 because this won't physically fit, but the thinner version will with its ridiculously tiny useless heatsink, and you just have to deal with it in a PlayStation. In a consumer desktop situation with a motherboard that has a full coverage plate, usually those plates are thick enough and heavy enough that may very well provide the cooling necessary. But if you have an open air situation, then you want the big chunky heatsink. With the firmware updated, this thing is, if not best in class, close to it. Samsung 980 Pro levels of performance. The reason why I own 3 of them is because these things were $120 less than the Samsung 980 Pro at the time I bought them. These were an unbelievable deal. It doesn't really matter anymore because the Samsungs have dropped in price. You can now buy a Samsung 980 Pro 2 terabyte drive on and off for about $180. Even if these were $160, for the Samsung software and firmware alone, I would just buy the Samsung. That's me. But if you already own one of these, update the firmware and you have yourself an amazing drive. But you have to decide which version you want to buy. If I were advising ADATA, I would say, ADATA, sell one version of the drive because 2 versions confuses everybody, and include both heat sinks in the box. Include the small little teeny useless heat sink for the PlayStation or for people who have confined spaces, and include the large heat sink which people can choose to stick on. I have tried removing the big chunky heatsink. It's glued on. Maybe you could do it, but you'd probably destroy the drive. So I haven't. I have 2 of these installed in systems that technically don't deserve them. The transfer rate doesn't matter, but the random performance does. Because of the big chunky heatsink, I can't put them in anything modern. One of these is installed in my original Ryzen 7 1700 build from 2017. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you know which one, or maybe you saw it, or perhaps you've gone back to see it. It is the original build I did on the channel featuring an ASUS Crosshair Hero 6 motherboard that is an X370 chipset that was put into a Cooler Master Master-Maker 5T case, which I didn't like that much when I first built it, but I really grew to love it over time, and it is now one of my favorite cases. Despite the limited space, despite the cost, despite the weight, I am keeping that case forever. I really, really like that case. And I kind of gave it a hard time on initial launch and review, but the truth is, over time, I'm like, okay, I'm really glad I have this case. I don't keep a lot of the builds forever. I don't have space. This stuff's expensive. I need to eventually repurpose it. I still have that build. Now, I've replaced the CPU with a Ryzen 7 2700X. Now, that motherboard now has BIOS updates. I could put a Ryzen 7 5700X in there just fine, but I am not doing that on purpose. That's going to be a classic Ryzen build as a memory of the beginning of the channel. That's one of the first builds that we ever did where companies sent us stuff. AMD sent us the launch CPUs. Okay, granted, the 2700X was Zen Plus, but the 1700 sucks today. It's really bad. The 2700X is a reasonable drop-in replacement for that machine. That computer has 32 gigabytes of RAM, 3200 DDR4, 3200 CL16. It actually originally had, this is kind of going off track, I should just do a system update where I take all the systems I'm keeping, put them on the desk, and talk about them, but I don't know if anybody would watch them. Let me know in the comment section below if you'd like me to take old builds, put them on the desk, and just talk. Here's what I did with it. Here's what I've tested. Here's what I upgraded. Here's why I'm keeping it. Here's what I've taken out. Do you want to see that level of content? Let me know in the comment section below, because I could talk for an hour about that machine. A very nice computer. The Flare XRAM no longer works with the latest BIOS updates. I have 32 gigabytes of DDR4 3200 CL14, really tight timing. It is the Samsung BDI AMD Ryzen Flare X certified RAM. I used it in that machine for several years. Works great, no problems. But with the latest BIOS updates on that motherboard that make it compatible with Zen 3, it broke the RAM. It won't boot. RAM works fine in other systems. Doesn't work there anymore. So, whatever. There's now 32 gigs of DDR4 3200 CL16. It makes no bloody difference. And I have one of these SSDs in there. The ASUS Crosshair Hero 6 has only one M.2 slot. We now have motherboards with 5 M.2 slots. That board only has one M.2 slot. Of course, being X370, it is Gen 3. But there's no full plate coverage, and it's down on the bottom. It's completely out of the way of the video card. Perfect for one of these. Who cares that it's Gen 3? What difference does it make? The fact is, the IOPS of this drive are amazing. The random performance is amazing. The endurance and size is amazing. That heatsink means it will never, ever, ever get hot. Or it'll never thermal throttle. So that's my boot drive in that machine. Another one of these is installed in my i7 4790K, which is ridiculously overpowered for that machine. That machine is not only PCI Express Gen 3, but that slot is actually Gen 2, and it's 2 lanes. It is 10 gigabits per second, 1.25 megabytes per second. This drive is capable of 7 gigs a second, and I have it installed in a slot that only works at 1. And I don't care, because it doesn't matter. It's overkill for that platform. It's overkill for the CPU. But again, there's nothing blocking the installation of big chunky heatsink. Now, if I had it to do over again, I would not own 3 of these. I thought you could remove the heatsink. I didn't know. To be honest, that wouldn't be in there if it weren't for the fact that I have the drive and it's like, where am I going to put it? I need a place to put it that the big chunky heatsink fits. But it does mean that that machine has a ridiculously good storage drive that will essentially last forever. And I can install everything on it, and I can use it, and I can put games and programs on it, and I just don't have any capacity issues, which is really, really nice. If you own one of these, keep it. Update the firmware, great drive. If you own the Blade version, fine. Just keep in mind that these do throttle a bit because they get hot if they're under intensive use. I've had hit and miss luck with ADATA's drives. These have been good, but I haven't owned them for like years and years and years the way I have some of the earlier drives. Time will tell how great they really end up being over the course of 5+ years of ownership, but I don't have them in any mission-critical applications, so I'm good. OCZ has a long and storied history. OCZ was originally called the Overclocker Store when it was founded by Ryan Peterson in 2000, selling overclocked Athlon processors, probably using the pencil trick. Raise your hand and leave a comment down below if you remember the pencil trick. So OCZ was one of the very early pioneers of solid-state drives. I own some early OCZ drives. This was in the Wild West days, where firmware updates were frequent, where firmware updates would often wipe your drive. Firmware updates would sometimes brick your drive. It was very much an unknown gamble back in those days. This is before Intel got in the game with their X25 and X25 G2 drives that brought some sanity and stability to the game. Now, OCZ continued to improve. They released the Apex and the Vertex drives, and then the Vertex drives. They then released the Vector drive, which I never used one of. The Vector was after they brought their controllers in-house. Before then, that was the Bigfoot controllers. Before then, they used the Sandforce controllers. Anybody remember the Sandforce controllers? I'd forgotten about the Sandforce controllers until I read about them just now. The reliability of those things was awful. That's why most of you 15 years ago didn't use SSDs. I had SSDs before the year 2000, but the first really, really good SSD I owned was an Intel X25 G2 that I bought off of Newegg in 2010, 13 years ago. 160 gigabytes. Raise your hand if you can guess how much I paid for a 160 gigabyte SATA 2 drive, mind you, not even SATA 3, SATA 2 X25 G2 from Intel, from Newegg. Go on, I'll wait. I'll give you a hint. It was during their promotion where they were attempting to hold up the price of the drives but move more units and probably get rid of some of their value units. Does anybody remember the X25 V drives for value? They made a 40 gigabyte value drive, and Newegg ran a promotion where if you bought an X25 G2 160 gig drive, you got a 40 gigabyte X25 V drive for free. $550. And that was a really good price at the time for a 160 gig drive and a free 40 gig drive. Now, there were larger drives for about that price at the time. You could buy a 200, 250 gig SSD from OCZ or other companies for about the same money. The difference is you might get a drive that lasts 6 months or 3 years. You update the firmware, it might work, it might not. What the Intel drives really brought were stability, reliable firmware updates, reliable performance, and a fuss-free experience. I still own both of those drives. They still work perfectly. They're slow. They are, I don't want to say they're as bad as a hard drive. You know, if we had a retro channel, I honestly think it'd be hilarious to benchmark a modern hard drive versus those SSDs. A modern hard drive might win. In random, it'd be closer than you'd think. in sequential, the modern hard drives would blow them away. So I still have those drives. They still work. For a very long time, I had the 160 gig drive booting my i7 920, and it's then moved into a variety of other machines. For a while, it was the boot drive in my Q6600 Core 2 Quad. That's since been upgraded to, I think, a 500 gig Samsung something or other. 840, 840 Pro, 850 Evo. I don't remember. It's got something bigger in it now. Those drives are actually on my shelf, and I should have brought them in here, but I didn't. It doesn't matter. I'd just be holding up a little piece of plastic that wouldn't matter. But so SSDs have come a long way since then. OCZ ended up going bankrupt because you can only make crappy products for so long, and then eventually larger companies with bigger pockets come along and do a better job than you do. And they probably should have sold out before they went bankrupt. Toshiba bought the remnants. This is a Toshiba drive. It has OCZ's branding on it. Now, they have since retired OCZ. They don't even use it anymore. So they bought them out of bankruptcy, released a couple of drives, and then went, well, nobody wants these things. Yeah, because they were kind of unimpressive. This uses an S10 Phison controller rebranded to Toshiba. It's the same as all the other S10 drives I've shown you. These are the most unimpressive TLC, DRAM-less, boring drives ever. I don't have these anymore. I actually did have, this is the 480 gig drive. This was installed in a Ryzen 3 2200G build that I did on the channel back in like 2017, 2018. That got upgraded to a Ryzen 5 2400G. That got upgraded to a Ryzen 5 3400G. That briefly got upgraded to a Ryzen 7 3700X. And then I tried dropping in a 5700G and discovered that despite the fact that the BIOS supported it, that system never ran right with modern CPUs. And it had a crappy SSD and crappy power supply and a terrible case with no airflow, and the whole thing was just an absolutely awful machine. Sort of one of the reasons of why I say don't build a cheap machine if you can afford to build a nice machine. So that machine's since been replaced with a much nicer machine and much nicer parts, and it's actually got the 5700G in it at the moment. And for a basic front desk office machine that prints shipping labels and does email and other paperwork, it's overkill, but it's lovely. So I retired these. I don't use them anymore. I don't think I have either one of them. This is a 240 gig version. That's a 480 gig version. If you have one of these, please retire the thing. I mean, if it's in an old machine, you keep it there. If you've got it in a Ryzen 3 2200G, if you've got it in a Ryzen 5 1600 and you're going to leave it there, sure. Honestly, they weren't great when they were new. And Toshiba kind of got out of that. I mean, Toshiba's an interesting company. They're a big company, but they keep dabbling in things, and then they vanish, and then they do something, and then they vanish. I remember in the 90s, my first DVD player was a Toshiba DVD player. My last CRT television was a Toshiba television, and a very nice one at that. I've owned a Toshiba LCD television. I've owned a variety of Toshiba products. But then they just go away somehow. I'm not exactly sure what Toshiba is well known for. Maybe it's not in the United States. Maybe they're bigger overseas and I'm just not familiar with it. But they seem to just kind of come and go and kind of come and go. I'm not really sure how that works. In any case, that's the Trion 150. Here's another brand of SSD you probably haven't heard of in a while. Transcend. They're still around. They make a variety of things, but if they make SSDs, they certainly don't publicize it. This is a very old drive back from the crucial BX100 days. This is a MLC drive, 2 bits per cell, with a DRAM buffer and relatively good SATA performance. The problem was it wasn't cheap for what it was. The price sort of kept it from being interesting. I was looking over the specs and the reviews, and essentially it's a decent enough drive that just wasn't that interesting. At the time that Tom's Hardware wrote the review, the 512 gig version of this was $176 at B&H Photo and Amazon. Newegg had it for $206 for a 512 gig drive. Now, granted, that was cheaper than 2010, but still, as prices dropped, you could buy better SSDs for less money, or you could buy drives from manufacturers that you knew better than Transcend. So it was fine, but it didn't have a purpose. I long since haven't had this. I have the 256 gig version box here, and this went into a build, and just like all the other drives I've mentioned in this video, if you can remember where this went into a video, because basically almost everything here was shown in a video at some point, post that down below. I would absolutely love to know where this went, but it's been gone for a while. I haven't seen this, in fact, I completely forgot about it until I saw the box and went, oh yeah, that thing. It's a thingy. Yeah, what do you want? It's another SSD by another company that repackaged. This is a Silicon Motion SM2246EN controller paired with DDR3 and Micron MLC flash. Next, we have a drive from a company well known for memory, Kingston. Kingston has been around forever. Back in the 90s, on 386s and 46s, I remember that people would actually want Kingston RAM. You would see computers advertised, comes with Kingston RAM. It was a name that meant something. Well, it was a name that marketed meant something. I actually don't know whether or not it made any difference back then, but it's a name that's been around a lot longer than many of the other brands that you know of today. This drive, however, is not made by Kingston, despite the brand name on the drive, because they don't make the controller, and they don't make the NAND, and they don't make the DRAM, and they don't make anything. They are, unfortunately, just a brand name. This, however, was a good drive for its day. Samsung 950 Pro levels of performance, and it is that old. This is an MLC NVMe drive. There's no SLC cache because there doesn't need to be one. It can write directly at full speed to the NAND on the drive. It does have a DRAM buffer. It does have a reasonably good controller. This is relatively slow by today's standards. You could use it in an older machine, but for the love of all that is good and holy, this does not belong in a modern build. If you still have one of these drives, don't. Yeah, I know, it's MLC, it's a nice drive, whatever, just don't. If you're going to build a new Raptor Lake or Zen 4 machine, this should be retired and left wherever it is, or sold, or given to a friend. It's a good drive, but its performance doesn't hold up. I would honestly take a modern premium SATA drive over this, just due to the improvements that have occurred since then. This doesn't have any further support. It's relatively small. Its write endurance is very, very low. I think it's time to move on. Now, you could leave it an old machine. If you've got a machine period appropriate to this, an i7 6700K would have had something like this installed if you went premium back in the day. Sure, you don't need to put a brand new drive in an i7 6700K, despite the fact that I put a stupid overkill drive into my 4790K. But I have a YouTube channel and I deal with technology for a living, so that's... Just because I do it doesn't mean I think you should do it. I think that often gets lost in advice, and when I talk about things, maybe I should be more explicitly clear about that sometimes. I do things because I have a stack of hardware, and I'll make choices and decisions because, of course, that could have 64 gigs of RAM, and of course, that could have 2 terabytes of NVMe, and of course, this can have a 4080 and a 4090, because I'm in the business, and so I end up with a lot of extra things. But that doesn't mean that you should go out and spend new money on it. If I didn't have a technology YouTube channel, my i7 4790K would absolutely positively not have a 2 terabyte Gen 4 NVMe S70 GAMX SSD. That's ridiculous. It would have the original SSD that I put in there several years ago, which was a 1 terabyte Intel 660p QLC NVMe SSD, which honestly for that machine is just fine. Despite its relatively modern failings, it's pretty powerful for that machine, but when you have them both on the shelf, you might as well. So this, retire this. This does not need to be in your machine anymore if you go new. But sure, keep it an old one. It's just fine. Circling back around to Sabrent, this is the Sabrent Rocket 3. Basically, it's a Gen 3 version of the Rocket 4.0 that I covered earlier, but that wasn't in the same spot in the stack, so it didn't get covered at the same time. This is a TLC with SLC cache, DRAM buffer, premium performance, about 3.5 gigabytes per second sequential read, and about the same random read and write as almost every other one of these modern drives. They're perfectly fine, reasonably priced, and there was a brief period where these things kind of made sense in terms of price, but like so many drives, the Samsungs and the Western Digitals got pretty close in price, so there's that. If you have one of these, keep using it. They're great. There's absolutely no reason to replace it. I have one of these drives in one of my test benches. I still use it. I will keep using it. I will keep using it after the 5.0 drives come out, because while they will be faster, it won't be by enough to make me go, yeah, let me throw away a perfectly good working drive. This is the kind of drive that maybe it's the boot drive in your older machine and it becomes the game drive in your next machine. The Crucial BX and MX series of SSDs is rather interesting, and I'm missing a couple of boxes that I could not find, so we're going to talk about more drives than just these that I have boxes for. These are boxes for the MX300. I also have multiple MX500 drives, and I don't have any MX500 boxes here, which confuses me because I own like 3 of them, so I don't know where I put them or where they went. I also have used the older drives, including going all the way back to the M4s before they came out with the MX and the BX branding. But that's not really what we're talking about at the moment. The BX300 is their older series of performance drives. These are TLC, SLC cache, DRAM buffer drives. They were sold in OEM configuration as the Micron 1100 because Crucial is the retail brand name of Micron. Micron Electronics? I'm going to assume it's Micron Electronics. I actually don't know what their full corporate name is. Micron's been around forever. They make RAM, they make storage, they make a variety of things. These are not as fast as an MX500. They are close enough that it does not make any difference. I remotely wouldn't care. I actually have the OEM version of the BX300 in my new Ryzen 9 7950X gaming PC at home. It is a 2 terabyte Micron 1100 SATA SSD, and it's like the 4th or 5th drive in that machine. Games I don't play very often, older games, OneDrive, stuff like that, can easily be put on an older drive like this. This is the kind of drive that is well worth keeping. It may be an MX300 was your boot drive 5 years ago, and then it became your game drive 3 years ago, and it becomes your tertiary drive 2 years from now, which is absolutely fine. If you buy a large enough size, and as a side note, this is also why I'm a big advocate of buying more storage than you think. I have seen so many people, even in the past 12 months, even in 2022, say, you don't need more than a 500 gig for your boot drive. A terabyte is wasted. 2 terabytes is stupid. Well, okay, there's different strokes for different folks, and there's different use cases for PCs, and certainly there are situations where a 500 gig boot drive might be all somebody needs for a certain purpose. I have machines with 500 gig boot drives in them, but they're not my daily driver. They are secondary or tertiary machines, including, for example, my email/eBay/front desk machine downstairs, which has a 500 gig Crucial P1 boot drive in it, which is neither huge nor amazing. For what that machine does, it's absolutely fine. If you go ahead and buy a larger than typical drive, you can then move it through machines and keep it for many years to come. Buy a 2 terabyte drive today, and it becomes a nice extra drive tomorrow. Buy a 500 gig drive today, and it's kind of useless tomorrow because files and games and programs and everything just keeps getting larger and larger. Now, the MX300 is also interesting because it came in some odd sizes, including 750 gigabytes. Yes, they made, in fact, that's what I'm holding right here, they made 750 gig SSDs. I actually had 2 of these. These were both installed in my Twitch streaming PC, my i7-8700K that I built right here on the channel 2017, 2018? I forget exactly when. I think later 2017 is when that got, end of 2017 is when that got built. So I had 2 of these. I actually no longer have these drives. They've since been sold, but they served their purpose. They were a nice compromise in terms of price and capacity at the time when storage was expensive. I also have a 250 gig drive. Here's another 750. And here's an odd size, 525 gigabytes. Not 512, not 500, 525. And it gets weirder. The 1 terabyte version of this drive was not 1 terabyte. It was 1,050. Not 1,024, not 1,000. It was 1,050. Weird size. The drives that came before this at some point stopped getting support and updates. In fact, if memory serves, the old M4 drives are typically, they don't have any updates or support in, or you cannot use the Crucial Storage Executive software to do the software acceleration, basically software caching on the older M4 drives, but you can on the MX100 and BX100 and up. Speaking of the BX, I have 2 of these. Well, okay, I had 2 of these. I've gotten rid of these. These are BX200s. For a company like Crucial, these are a rare miss. These are some of the worst SATA SSDs ever made. When you overrun the SLC cache in these, the performance, I have SD cards that are better performance than these things. These were awful. Now, the later on BX drives were better. The BX500, while it's a DRAM-less drive and it's very limited in overall performance, isn't that bad. The BX500 is tolerable. It should never be a boot drive, but I'm sure it has been used as a boot drive, but it was at least not horrible. The BX100 was not horrible, but the BX200, good God, they screwed that up. It was absolutely atrocious. Crucial makes a lot of SSDs. Now, they've moved on to mostly NVMe drives now, and I showed the Crucial P1 earlier. I actually don't have a lot of the latest and greatest Crucial drives because, well, a couple of them are decent. Like the P5 and the P5 Plus, those are premium performance high-end drives. The P3s are absolutely awful. And you can no longer tell based upon the name, is a P3 like a P5, but just not quite as good? Is it a previous generation performance drive because it's got P in the name? No, they're horrible, absolutely terrible drives. But a P3 and a P5 sound like the same thing. Yes, they do. Crucial's naming convention is awful these days. At least with MX and BX, you knew that the BX were the budget DRAM-less cheap drives and the MX drives were performance. Whether it's an MX300 or MX500, it doesn't make any difference. They're all good. But now with their naming scheme, you can't. This is actually, speaking of which, this is a common theme throughout a lot of these companies. Earlier, I talked about the SK Hynix P41 Platinum being one of the best Gen 4 premium NVMe drives on the market. They use the same P41 name. The SK Hynix P41 Plus, of which I don't have one because I value my sanity, is the exact opposite. QLC, budget, low-end, cheap. But to the layperson who doesn't know what they're doing, P41 Plus, P41 Platinum, well, I saw reviews of the P41 Platinum. So the P41 Plus is probably like that, but maybe just not quite as good. Oh, it's a cheap price. Oh, I'll take that. And they don't know any better. I find it eternally frustrating when companies do this. Shame on you. Even Samsung did this recently. Good Lord. The Samsung 980 Pro is one of the best Gen 4 NVMe drives on the market. Recently replaced by the 990 Pro, but doesn't really matter. The Samsung 980 non-Pro, non-Evo drive, DRAM-less. It's one of the first DRAM-less drives that Samsung has made in a long... You know, it might be the only DRAM-less. I don't know if the old drives pre-840 Evo, 850 Evo were DRAM-less. I don't. And I could look it up, but who cares? It's water under the bridge. It's the first DRAM-less drive Samsung's made in a very long time. I don't own one. I won't own one. And they sully the 980 name by doing that. One of the #1 best-selling SSDs on Amazon. eWin Racing has a wide selection of chairs to fit all shapes and sizes of gamers, ranging from petite to cuddly. They have something for every type of gamer. Not just sizes, but colors and material options as well, including red, blue, purple, pink, orange, and more, plus cloth and leather choices. We have over half a dozen chair and desk videos in a playlist down in the video description below. We also have a very special offer just for Tech Deals viewers. Save 30% off of everything using discount code TechDeals using our link in the video description. We have used eWin gaming chairs for 3 years in our office, sitting on them for up to 8-hour marathon live streams. They are very comfortable, and we are happy to work with eWin to bring you this special discount and recommend eWin for all of your gaming chair and desk needs. Thank you so much for watching to the very end. 2 gold stars for all of you for being awesome. Like, comment, subscribe, and do all of the YouTube things. As I noted in the beginning of this video, there will be a link to the playlist down in the description below. If you're watching this close to when it publishes, Part 6 will still be private. You can see the title and the thumbnail, but you can't watch the video unless you are a YouTube member. Again, as I said at the very beginning, pardon me while I pitch the channel and try to pay the bills here, $2 a month or $20 for the entire year gets you early access to that. If you're watching this later on and it's already public, well then just go ahead and click on that and watch the next part. And for all of you who have watched this entire thing, I think I need to ask our lovely editor to add a 3rd bonus gold star to all of you because you are amazing. Thank you so much for watching. I will see all of you in Part 6.